Before we begin, I need you to understand something. This isn't a story about junkies. This isn't a story about moral failure or weak willpower. This is a story about a single prescription, a little white pill promised to change pain management forever, and how it became the gateway that funneled an entire generation toward heroin needles. So if you're here for the journey, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you want to understand how medicine became a trap. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Phone away, distractions silenced. Let's begin. Picture yourself in a body that has turned against you. It's 1987. You wake up every morning and for approximately 3 seconds everything is fine. Then you move. Then you remember. The pain announces itself like it does every day. A dull roar at the base of your spine that sharpens into something electric the moment you try to sit up. You've been living with this for 2 years now. A herniated disc, they told you. Workers' compensation covered the surgery. The surgery didn't work. You're 41 years old. You used to operate a forklift at a distribution center outside Columbus. 12-hour shifts. Good union wages. Now you operate nothing. Now you spend your days in a recliner that doesn't recline far enough to help and doesn't sit up straight enough to let you function. Your doctor is a kind man with concerned eyes who tells you, each visit, the same thing. I really can't prescribe anything stronger. The ibuprofen should be helping. Have you tried the heating pad? You have tried the heating pad. You have tried ice. You have tried physical therapy until the workers' comp paperwork ran out. You have tried over-the-counter everything. You have tried prayer. You have tried whiskey, which helps a little, but makes the next morning worse. You have tried not moving, but even your stillness hurts. What you haven't tried, what nobody will let you try, are the drugs that actually work on pain. This is the world before, the world of opiophobia. If you're under 40, you probably can't imagine it. The America of the 1980s was a country where doctors were terrified to prescribe opioid painkillers. Not cautious, terrified. The fear wasn't irrational, it was trained into them. Medical schools taught that opioids were addiction machines, that prescribing them for anything other than cancer or end-of-life care was essentially malpractice. The DEA was watching, state medical boards were watching. One wrong prescription and you could lose your license. One pattern of overprescribing and you could lose your freedom. So doctors didn't prescribe, and patients suffered. This wasn't a minor inconvenience. This was a crisis hiding in plain sight. Somewhere between 50 and 100 million Americans lived with chronic pain. That's not a guess. That's the range from various studies trying to count the uncountable. People with failed back surgeries. People with rheumatoid arthritis turning their joints into ground glass. People with nerve damage that sent lightning bolts down their legs every time they took a step. People with conditions that had names and conditions that didn't. All united by one thing, pain that wouldn't stop. And the medical system's answer was aspirin, anti-inflammatories that tore up your stomach if you took enough to actually help, physical therapy that you couldn't afford, surgery that might work or might make things worse, antidepressants prescribed for pain because someone somewhere decided that if you couldn't eliminate the suffering, you could at least make the patient not care about it. The message was clear, even if nobody said it out loud. Your pain is suspicious. Your suffering is probably exaggerated. If the Tylenol isn't working, maybe you're not trying hard enough. Consider what that does to a person. You're not being told you're making it up. That would at least be a direct accusation you could fight. You're being told through omission and hesitation and reluctant prescriptions for medications that don't work, that your experience might not be real, that your own nervous system might be lying, that the thing consuming your life might be at some fundamental level your fault. Cancer patients died screaming. I need you to understand this literally. In the 1980s, in the United States of America, in hospitals with every modern technology, people with terminal cancer died in agony because their doctors were afraid to give them enough morphine. The fear was that the patient might become addicted, the patient who had weeks to live, the patient who would never leave the hospital. The doctors were protecting these patients from a dependency they would never survive long enough to experience. Post-surgical patients went home with Tylenol. You could have your chest cracked open for heart surgery and leave the hospital with instructions to take 2 acetaminophen every 4 to 6 hours. Knee replacements, hip replacements, spinal fusions, procedures that involve sawing through bone and rearranging the architecture of your body, followed by prescriptions for medications you could buy at a gas station. The pendulum had swung so far toward restriction that it had left millions of people in a medical no man's land. They had real conditions causing real pain, and the system built to help them had decided that helping them was too dangerous. Back in Ohio, our factory worker, let's call him Tom because we'll be following him for a while, is watching his life disintegrate. He's 41 going on 70. He can't play with his kids anymore. He can't help his wife with groceries. He spends most of his time in that recliner, waiting for the next dose of ibuprofen that he knows won't really help, watching game shows and trying not to think about what his life used to be. His marriage is straining, not because anyone did anything wrong, just because pain is corrosive. It leaks into everything. It makes you short-tempered and distant, and difficult to love. His wife brings him food and he barely tastes it. His kids ask if he wants to throw a ball around and he has to say no, again, for the 500th time. He's thought about ending it, not seriously, not with a plan, but the thought has crossed his mind. What kind of life is this? What kind of future? 20 more years of staring at the same ceiling, feeling the same fire in his spine, watching everyone else live while he waits to die. His doctor, the kind man with concerned eyes, doesn't know about these thoughts. Tom doesn't tell him. What would be the point? The doctor can't help. The doctor isn't allowed to help. The doctor is operating within a system that has decided Tom's suffering is less important than the risk that Tom might like his medication too much. This is 1989. In a few years, everything will change. The pendulum will swing back, will swing so far back that it overcorrects into catastrophe. But Tom doesn't know that yet. Tom knows only that he's trapped in a body that doesn't work, in a medical system that won't help, in a life that has contracted down to the size of his pain. Every catastrophe begins with good intentions. Every road to hell is paved by people trying to help. In the late 1980s, a group of doctors looked at the Toms of America and decided something had to change. They weren't profiteers or pushers. They were physicians who had watched their patients suffer and wanted to do something about it. They called themselves pain specialists, and they started a movement. The father of this movement, or at least its most influential evangelist, was a man named Russell Portenoy. Dr. Portenoy was a neurologist at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York. He'd spent his career watching cancer patients suffer unnecessarily because their doctors were afraid of opioids, and in 1986 he published a paper that would change everything. The paper reviewed 38 patients who had been treated with opioids for chronic non-cancer pain. The conclusion was remarkable. Only 2 of them showed signs of addiction. Opioids, Portenoy argued, were being irrationally restricted. The fear of addiction was overblown. For most patients, long-term opioid therapy was safe. 38 patients, that's all. 38 people in one hospital, tracked by one team, presented as evidence that opioids were safer than everyone thought. The paper was a single small stone, but it landed in exactly the right place at exactly the right time, and it started an avalanche. Portenoy became a celebrity in medical circles. He gave speeches. He published more papers. He told audiences of doctors that they were under-treating pain, that their fears were irrational, that opioids were the answer they'd been too scared to use. Addiction among pain patients, he said, over and over, is rare. The real danger is under-treating pain. He wasn't alone. The pain movement grew. Pain societies formed. Pain journals launched. Pain became a specialty with its own conferences, its own language, its own sense of mission. Other forces were pushing in the same direction. The AIDS crisis, counterintuitively, had made doctors more sympathetic to suffering. Watching young people die from an incurable disease, watching them die in pain while society debated whether they deserved compassion, had shifted something in the medical profession. Pain became political. Treating it became an act of care in a world that seemed to have forgotten how. The hospice movement had legitimized opioids for dying patients. If it was acceptable, even mandatory, to give morphine to someone with weeks to live, why was it forbidden to give the same relief to someone who might live for years? The logical gap was hard to defend. The dying deserved pain relief. Didn't the living deserve it too? In 1995, the American Pain Society introduced a concept that would reshape American medicine. Pain as the fifth vital sign: temperature, pulse, respiration, blood pressure, and now pain. Every patient visit should include a pain assessment. Every doctor should be asking, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much does it hurt? This was genuinely revolutionary. For decades, pain had been invisible in medical records, something patients complained about but doctors didn't have to document or address. Now it would be measured, tracked, treated. Hospitals would be evaluated on their pain management. Doctors would be graded on how well they eliminated suffering. The pendulum was swinging. The opiophobia of the 1980s was giving way to something new, an aggressive commitment to treating pain at all costs. Medical boards that had once punished doctors for prescribing opioids began punishing them for not prescribing enough. The message flipped completely. Undertreating pain is malpractice. We have the tools, use them. Dr. Portnoy would later apologize. In 2011, he would tell the Wall Street Journal that he had been overly optimistic about the safety of opioids. But in the 1990s, he was a prophet, and the church he was building was hungry for a sacrament. Into this moment of transition walked a family that already knew how to sell drugs to America. The Sacklers were wealthy before OxyContin. They had built their fortune on Valium, not by inventing it, but by marketing it. In the 1960s, Arthur Sackler had pioneered pharmaceutical advertising techniques that seem obvious now but were revolutionary then. Advertise directly to doctors, sponsor their conferences, wine and dine them, create medical journals that looked independent but were actually marketing vehicles, turn physicians into salespeople without them realizing they were selling. Valium became the most prescribed drug in America. The Sacklers became art collectors and philanthropists, their name adorning museum wings at the Met, the Louvre, the Smithsonian. The money came from pills, but the legacy was culture. Nobody associated the Sackler galleries with tranquilizer addiction. By the 1990s, the family's pharmaceutical company Purdue Pharma was looking for the next big thing. They found it in time-release technology. The idea was elegant. Take oxycodone, a strong opioid painkiller that had been around for decades, and embed it in a formula that released the drug slowly over 12 hours. Instead of taking a pill every 4 hours and riding the roller coaster of pain relief in return, patients could take one pill in the morning and one at night. Steady relief, better quality of life, a simple solution to a complicated problem. They called it OxyContin. The contin was for continuous. The promise built right into the name. The timing was perfect. The pain movement had prepared the ground. Doctors were ready, eager even to prescribe opioids for chronic pain. They just needed someone to give them permission. OxyContin arrived with permission built in, time-release technology. Purdue claimed, made it safer than older opioids. The slow absorption meant no euphoric rush. No rush meant no addiction. The pill was designed to be boring. On December 28, 1995, the FDA approved OxyContin for moderate to severe pain. In January 1996, it hit the market with a marketing campaign, unlike anything pain medicine had ever seen. Less than 1% of patients become addicted. This was the number that Purdue's sales representatives repeated to doctors across America. Less than 1%. The rate was so low it was almost a rounding error. Prescribe freely. You're not creating addicts, you're relieving suffering. Where did that number come from? This is the part that should make you angry. It came from a letter, not a study, not a clinical trial, a letter to the editor, published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 1980. 5 paragraphs long, by a doctor named Herschel Jick. The letter reviewed records of hospitalized patients given opioids and found that only 4 out of nearly 12,000 developed addiction. There were problems with using this letter as evidence. The patients were hospitalized, monitored, given controlled doses for limited periods. The letter said nothing about outpatient use. It said nothing about chronic pain. It said nothing about taking opioids for months or years. Dr. Jick himself would later express horror at how his brief observation had been weaponized, but Purdue didn't mention those caveats. The sales reps showed doctors the letter and let them draw their own conclusions. Less than 1%. Safe. Prescribe. The FDA examiner who approved OxyContin was named Curtis Wright. He found no reason to limit the drug's use. He accepted Purdue's claims about addiction risk. He saw no need for special warnings. 2 years later, Curtis Wright left the FDA. He took a job with Purdue Pharma. The salary was not disclosed. This is the shape of the trap being built. A legitimate crisis of undertreated pain, a medical movement desperate for solutions, a company with a drug and a marketing machine, a regulatory agency that wasn't watching closely enough, and at the center, a claim that would turn out to be catastrophically wrong, repeated so often that everyone believed it. Back in Ohio, the year is now 1997. Tom is 49 years old. His hair has gone grey at the temples. His kids are teenagers who have learned not to ask him to do things he can't do. His marriage has survived, barely, held together by stubbornness and 2 decades of shared history. His back still hurts. It has been 8 years. He's been through 3 doctors since the original injury. The first retired, the second moved away. The third is younger, just a few years out of residency, and something about him is different. He asks about Tom's pain without suspicion. He talks about quality of life. At the end of the appointment, this new doctor writes a prescription. He hands it to Tom with something that looks like confidence. "This is different," the doctor says. "It's new. Time release. You take it twice a day, and it just works. All day, steady relief. And the best part, it's not really addictive. Less than 1% of patients develop any dependency. The research is clear." Tom looks at the prescription. OxyContin 40 milligrams. He doesn't know what it is. He doesn't know that a pharmaceutical company in Connecticut has spent millions of dollars to put this piece of paper in his hand. He doesn't know that the research isn't clear, that it's barely research at all. He doesn't know that he is about to become a statistic in the largest drug epidemic in American history. What Tom knows is that a doctor is finally taking his pain seriously. What Tom feels for the first time in 8 years is something like hope. He fills the prescription at the pharmacy across from the grocery store. He takes his first pill that evening, swallowing it with water at the kitchen table while his wife washes dishes. An hour later, the pain begins to quiet. Not disappear, it's still there, a dull presence at the base of his spine, but quiet, like someone has turned down the volume on a radio that's been screaming for 8 years. He can breathe, he can sit up straight without wincing. He can imagine, for the first time in years, doing something other than suffering. He calls his wife over. "I think this is working," he says. His voice sounds strange to both of them. It sounds like it used to sound before. That night, Tom sleeps through until morning. He hasn't done that in 8 years either. He wakes up feeling something he'd forgotten was possible. Normal. The pain is there, it never fully leaves, but it's manageable. He can move, he can function, he can be a person instead of a patient. This is the promise. This is the moment that will be repeated millions of times across America over the next decade. The moment when the pill works, when the pain finally relents, when life feels possible again. What comes after the tolerance, the dependence, the escalation, the destruction that's still years away? Right now, in this kitchen in Ohio in 1997, there is only relief, there is only gratitude, there is only Tom feeling human for the first time in 8 years, not knowing that the hope in his hands is a hook. The machine is spinning up, the sales force is doubling, the prescriptions are multiplying exponentially. The bodies haven't started stacking yet, but they will. For now, there is just a man in Ohio, holding a bottle of pills, feeling something he'd forgotten was possible. The promise has been made, the trap has been set. Everything that comes next, all of it, follows from this moment. In 1996, Purdue Pharma employed 318 sales representatives. By 2000, they had 671. By 2002, over 1,000. This wasn't growth, this was deployment. An army doesn't triple in size because business is good. An army triples in size because someone is planning a campaign. The pharmaceutical industry has always employed sales representatives. That's not unusual. What Purdue built was something different. Something that looked like sales but functioned like conquest. A systematic apparatus designed not to inform doctors but to capture them. Every sales representative received the same training, the same scripts, the same carefully tested phrases designed to overcome objections before they were raised. They learned that OxyContin provided smooth and sustained pain relief. They learned that the time-release formula made it less attractive to drug abusers. They learned that fewer than 1% of patients became addicted. They learned these phrases the way soldiers learn to disassemble rifles. Automatic, reflexive, beyond question. The targeting was surgical. Purdue didn't waste resources on doctors who were skeptical of opioids. They didn't bother with physicians who asked too many questions or demanded too much evidence. Instead, they built databases. They tracked prescribing patterns. They identified the doctors who already wrote the most opioid prescriptions, and they focused their entire apparatus on those physicians. The logic was elegant in its coldness. A doctor who already prescribes a lot of opioids doesn't need to be convinced that opioids work. He just needs to be convinced that this opioid is better than the ones he's already prescribing. That's a much easier sale. That's a conversation about features, not philosophy. That's a doctor who's already passed the hard part. These high-prescribing physicians became royalty in Purdue's system. They received the most visits, the most attention, the most gifts, and eventually, the most lucrative offers. The speaker programs were genius in their simplicity. Purdue paid doctors to speak to other doctors about OxyContin, not Purdue employees, doctors, trusted colleagues, people the audience already knew. The payment was generous, a few $1,000s for a dinner presentation, maybe $10,000 for a weekend conference. The doctors who participated didn't think of themselves as salespeople. They thought of themselves as educators, sharing important medical advances with their peers. Here's the thing about being paid to say something. After a while, you start believing it. After a while, the money stops feeling like payment and starts feeling like recognition. After a while, you forget that you're part of a machine. You just know that OxyContin works, and you're helping your colleagues understand that. By 2001, Purdue was spending over $200 million annually on marketing OxyContin. The speaker programs alone involved thousands of physicians, an entire parallel education system funded by a pharmaceutical company, teaching doctors to prescribe a specific drug, not pain management generally, not opioid safety, just OxyContin, and it worked. Let me show you what this looked like on the ground. Let me take you inside the machine. It's October 1999. You're a pharmaceutical sales representative named Jennifer. You're 28 years old. You graduated from a state university with a degree in marketing. You have $43,000 in student loan debt. Your base salary is $55,000 per year, which sounds good until you remember you're driving 40,000 miles annually across rural Kentucky and West Virginia. But there's the bonus structure. And the bonus structure is where it gets interesting. Your bonus is calculated quarterly based on the total OxyContin prescriptions written by the physicians in your territory, not patient outcomes, not pain relief achieved, not lives improved, prescriptions. Each prescription converted to a dollar value, then to a percentage of your bonus pool. The math is simple. More prescriptions, more money. Last quarter, you made $18,000 in bonuses. That's on top of your base salary. That's more than your mother makes in 6 months. That's your student loans paid off in 2 years instead of 10. That's a different life. You wake up at 5:30 a.m. in a motel outside Pikeville. You have 7 doctor visits scheduled today. Your regional manager expects call notes from each visit by midnight. The call notes template has specific fields, objections raised, responses given, samples left, follow-up needed, everything tracked, everything measured. Your first visit is Dr. Harold Munksy. He's a family practice physician in a town of 6,000 people. According to your database, he wrote 847 opioid prescriptions last year. That makes him valuable. That makes him worth your time. You arrive at his office at 8:15, before his first patient. You're carrying a bag containing samples, brochures, and a small gift. Today it's a nice pen, nothing extravagant, nothing that would trigger the gift limits. Just a pen that costs $40 and has the OxyContin logo tastefully embossed. Dr. Muncie is tired. He's been practicing in this town for 22 years. He has patients in the coal mines, patients in the chicken processing plant, patients who've been doing back-breaking work since they were teenagers and now they're 45 and broken. He believes in treating pain. He believes his patients deserve relief. These beliefs make him receptive. You don't argue with him, you don't try to convince him of anything he doesn't already believe. You just give him permission to do what he already wants to do. You tell him OxyContin is different, safer. The time-release formula means patients can't abuse it. The data shows minimal addiction risk. You hand him the studies, you hand him the brochures, you hand him the samples. The samples are important. 30-day supply, free. Dr. Muncie can give these to patients who can't afford the prescription, who don't have insurance, who just need to try it before they commit. It's a kindness. It's also a hook. After 30 days of opioid use, a patient's body has begun to adjust. After 30 days, stopping isn't just disappointing, it's uncomfortable. After 30 days, they're going to need more. Dr. Muncie takes the samples. He signs for them. You note this in your call log. Samples delivered. Physician receptive. Follow-up scheduled for November. By 11 a.m., you visited 3 doctors. By 3 p.m., 6. Each visit follows the same script. Each conversation hits the same points. Each doctor receives the same carefully calibrated message. OxyContin is safe. OxyContin is effective. OxyContin is different. At 6 p.m., you're in a steakhouse outside Charleston. You're hosting a dinner for 12 physicians and their spouses. Purdue is paying for everything. The speaker tonight is Dr. Alan Spanos, a pain specialist from Lexington, who's been on the speaker circuit for 2 years. He'll talk for an hour about breakthrough pain management. He'll answer questions. He'll share his clinical experience. He'll mention OxyContin approximately 40 times. The physicians at this dinner will prescribe more OxyContin next month than they did last month. Not because they were bribed, not because they're corrupt, because they trust Dr. Spanos, because the science sounds solid, because their patients are in pain, and here's a solution that seems to work. You drive back to your motel at 10 p.m. You spend 2 hours completing your call notes. You upload them to the company system. You set your alarm for 5:30. Tomorrow you do it again. By the end of the year, the total OxyContin prescriptions in your territory have increased by 34%. Your annual bonus is $71,000. Your total compensation is $126,000. You are 28 years old and making more money than anyone in your family has ever made. You don't think of yourself as a drug dealer. You think of yourself as helping people manage their pain. You believe the things you're saying. You have to. The alternative is unthinkable. The machine doesn't require villains. The machine just requires people doing their jobs. The machine worked. The machine worked better than anyone could have predicted. OxyContin sales went from $44 million in 1996 to $1.1 billion in 2000 to $1.5 billion in 2002. But the legitimate medical market, the chronic pain patients and cancer patients and post-surgical patients, couldn't absorb that much growth. The numbers only make sense if you understand that the market was expanding, not the market for pain relief, the market for OxyContin, and specifically, a market that was being manufactured. The pill mills emerged to serve this manufactured demand. They looked like medical clinics. Some of them had been medical clinics, but they had transformed into something else. Prescription factories, assembly lines for controlled substances. Florida became the capital. There were reasons. Florida had weak prescription monitoring. Florida had a large population of retirees with chronic pain. Florida had a regulatory environment that made it easy to open a pain clinic and hard to close one. By 2010, doctors in Florida were purchasing 89% of all the oxycodone sold directly to practitioners in the entire United States. The I-75 corridor became a pipeline. You could drive from eastern Kentucky, from West Virginia, from rural Ohio, straight down Interstate 75 to Florida. The clinics clustered around the highway exits. They advertised in phone books, in newspapers, on billboards visible from the road. Pain management, walk-ins welcome, cash accepted. The model was simple. A patient walks in complaining of pain. The clinic performs a cursory examination, maybe an MRI that's read by someone who isn't actually a radiologist, maybe just a conversation. The doctor writes a prescription. The patient pays cash, $200, $300, sometimes more. The patient fills the prescription at an in-house pharmacy or at one of the many pharmacies that had opened nearby specifically to serve the clinics. The patient drives home. Some doctors were writing 300 prescriptions a day. Think about that number, 300 prescriptions. If each patient visit takes 5 minutes, that's 25 hours of patient care in a day. The math doesn't work unless you understand that patient care wasn't the point. The prescriptions were the point. The waiting rooms told the story. I want you to picture a waiting room in a strip mall clinic in Broward County, Florida. It's 2005, it's 7 a.m. and the clinic doesn't open until 9, but there's already a line. There's already a crowd. There's a construction worker from Ohio. He's 34 years old. He hurt his back 3 years ago and his doctor gave him Percocet and it worked. But his doctor retired and the new doctor doesn't prescribe opioids the same way. And now he drives to Florida every month because it's the only way he can keep working. He doesn't think of himself as an addict. He thinks of himself as a working man managing a work injury. He has prescriptions. He has bottles with his name on them. He's not doing anything wrong. There's a grandmother from Tennessee. She's 67 years old. She has fibromyalgia that no one quite understands, and arthritis that everyone understands, and a primary care physician who gives her 2 weeks of medication at a time because he's scared of the DEA. She drives to Florida with her sister. They make a trip of it. They stay in a motel, eat at a nice restaurant, visit the clinic in the morning. She has prescriptions. She has bottles with her name on them. She's not doing anything wrong. There's a high school athlete from Georgia. He's 19 years old. He blew out his knee playing football and the surgery fixed the knee but didn't fix the pain, and then someone told him about these clinics and now he's here. He tells himself he needs the pills to function. He tells himself he'll stop when the pain stops. He has prescriptions. He has bottles with his name on them. He's not doing anything wrong. There's a veteran from Kentucky. He's 41 years old. He did 2 tours in Iraq and came back with shrapnel in his leg and memories in his head and a VA system that couldn't help with either. Someone at the VFW told him about the Florida clinics. He drives down every few weeks with a buddy from his unit. They split the gas money. He has prescriptions. He has bottles with his name on them. He's not doing anything wrong. None of them think they're doing anything wrong. They all have prescriptions. They're all following doctor's orders. They're all just trying to feel normal. What they don't know, what they can't know, is that their inventory, they're customers in a system designed to turn their pain into profit. The doctors writing their prescriptions aren't treating them. The doctors are processing them. The clinics aren't providing healthcare. The clinics are providing product. Purdue knew about the pill mills. Internal documents show they knew. Their own sales data showed them which doctors were prescribing far outside normal parameters. Their own distribution records showed them which pharmacies were ordering impossible quantities. They knew. An internal memo from 2000 warned about a blizzard of prescriptions in certain regions. The memo didn't recommend intervention. The memo didn't suggest reporting concerns to the DEA. The memo discussed the blizzard as a business challenge, how to manage supply, how to maintain market share, how to handle the public relations implications if things got out of hand. The machine didn't stop when it encountered abuse. The machine incorporated abuse into its business model. What Purdue said publicly and what Purdue knew internally were 2 different things. This isn't interpretation. This isn't inference. This is documented. This is evidence that emerged through lawsuits and congressional investigations and criminal prosecutions. This is the company's own words in their own documents admitting what they were doing while denying it to everyone else. In 1999, Purdue commissioned a study of OxyContin abuse. The results were troubling. The study found significant diversion, pills being sold on the street, pills being crushed and snorted, pills being used in ways that the time-release formula was supposed to prevent. The company did not publish this study. The company did not share these findings with physicians. The company continued to market OxyContin as abuse-resistant. Sales representatives were trained to tell doctors that OxyContin was weaker than morphine. This was a lie. OxyContin is oxycodone, which is roughly 1.5 times as potent as morphine milligram for milligram. The lie served a purpose. Doctors who thought they were prescribing something weaker would prescribe more freely. Doctors who knew the truth might hesitate. The company promoted a concept called pseudo-addiction. This was perhaps the most elegant deception of all. The concept worked like this. If a patient taking opioids displays drug-seeking behavior, asking for higher doses, asking for early refills, fixating on their medication, this might not be addiction. This might be pseudo-addiction. This might be a sign that the patient's pain is undertreated. The solution to pseudo-addiction isn't fewer opioids. The solution is more opioids. Do you understand what this means? Purdue created a framework where the symptoms of addiction became evidence for prescribing more of the addictive substance. The sicker the patient got, the more medicine they needed. The more addicted they became, the more undertreated they appeared. The concept turned the warning signs into justifications. Doctors believed this. Doctors taught this to other doctors. Peer-reviewed papers were published promoting pseudo-addiction as a legitimate clinical concept. An entire medical framework emerged to explain away the obvious. Patients asking for more drugs weren't addicted. They were undertreated. The solution was always more. The time-release formula was supposed to prevent abuse. That was the central marketing claim. Take the pill as directed and the medication releases slowly over 12 hours. No rush, no high, no addiction potential. This was the promise that justified everything else. The promise was false from the beginning. OxyContin tablets could be crushed. The time-release mechanism was defeated with a kitchen knife or a pill crusher, or just someone's teeth. Once crushed, the entire 12-hour dose became available immediately. Users figured this out within months of the drug's release. Purdue knew they figured it out. Purdue's own abuse studies documented it. Purdue continued to market OxyContin as abuse-resistant. In 2007, the bill came due. Partially, Purdue Pharma and 3 of its executives pleaded guilty to federal charges of misbranding OxyContin. The company admitted that it had fraudulently marketed the drug as less addictive and less subject to abuse than other opioids. The fine was $634 million. $634 million sounds like accountability. It wasn't. Purdue's revenues from OxyContin by 2007 exceeded $20 billion. The fine was a cost of doing business, a rounding error, a parking ticket after a decade of speeding. The 3 executives who pleaded guilty were the company's president, its chief medical officer, and its former chief legal officer. Their punishment was probation and community service. No prison time, not a single day behind bars. They paid personal fines totaling $34 million. Combined, their OxyContin-related compensation over the relevant period exceeded $100 million. These were the consequences for knowingly deceiving doctors, knowingly fueling an addiction epidemic, knowingly destroying lives. Probation, community service, a fine smaller than their personal profits. The company kept operating. The executives kept their freedom. The machine kept running. The only people who went to prison were the users, the addicts, the people caught at the bottom of the system rather than the top. Here's what's happening in your brain while all of this is going on. Here's the biological machinery that Purdue understood and exploited. Your brain produces its own opioids. They're called endorphins. They regulate pain. They regulate pleasure. They regulate your baseline sense of okayness. You've been producing them your whole life. Your brain has calibrated itself around their presence. When you take an external opioid like OxyContin, it floods these same receptors. The effect is stronger than your natural endorphins, much stronger. Your brain registers this as a surplus. Too many opioids signaling. System overloaded. And your brain, which is an adaptation machine, begins to adapt. The first adaptation is tolerance. Your brain reduces its sensitivity to opioids. More receptors get down-regulated or internalized. The same dose that worked last month doesn't work as well this month. You need more to achieve the same effect. This isn't psychological weakness. This is neurochemistry. Your brain is doing exactly what brains do. The second adaptation is dependence. Your brain has gotten used to the external supply. It has reduced its own production of endorphins. It has reconfigured itself around the assumption that opioids will be present. When the external supply stops, your brain doesn't immediately reconfigure back. It takes time, and during that time you have neither the external supply nor adequate internal production. You are, biochemically speaking, running on empty. This is withdrawal. This is what the system created in millions of people and then abandoned them to experience. Picture your brain as a thermostat. You've been running it at one temperature for 40 years. Every day you wake up and the thermostat maintains a stable internal climate. Not too hot, not too cold, just right. This is homeostasis. This is normal. Now someone comes along and manually resets your thermostat. Every single day for 6 months they push it 10 degrees warmer. Your house adjusts. Your house gets used to the new temperature. Your house starts assuming this is how things should be. Then, one day, they stop. No warning, no transition period. They just stop adjusting the thermostat. But your house doesn't know that. Your house has spent 6 months recalibrating around the new normal. Your house has changed its insulation, changed its ventilation, changed its entire infrastructure to accommodate this reality. Suddenly the thermostat drops, not back to where it started, lower, because your house dismantled some of the systems that maintained the original temperature, because your house adapted to something that no longer exists. This is what happened to millions of Americans who did nothing wrong except trust their doctors. They followed instructions, they took pills as prescribed. They didn't crush them or snort them or sell them on street corners. They were good patients, they were compliant patients, and their brains adapted to a reality that someone else was controlling. The timeline is merciless. Physical dependence can begin within 2 weeks of daily opioid use. Not addiction necessarily, not psychological craving, just the body adjusting. The body assuming the opioids will continue, the body laying down infrastructure for a new normal. By 6 months of daily use, the changes are significant. The neural pathways have been altered, the receptor densities have shifted, the endorphin production has declined. At this point, stopping isn't a choice in any meaningful sense. Stopping is a crisis. Stopping is your body in revolt against a change it didn't agree to. By a year of daily use, by 2 years, by 5 years, the brain has been fundamentally rewired. This isn't metaphor. Brain imaging studies show structural differences between opioid-dependent individuals and controls. The changes are real. The changes are physical. The changes don't go away just because you decided to quit. And the patients didn't know this was happening. Why would they? Their doctors didn't tell them. The pharmaceutical companies certainly didn't tell them. The FDA didn't require warnings about dependence potential. Everyone involved in creating this outcome remained silent about its inevitability. The trap was elegant. The pills worked. The pain went away. The patients felt better. They had no reason to question what was happening beneath the surface. By the time they understood, by the time anyone understood, they were already caught. This wasn't moral failure. This was biology exploited by commerce. This was predictable neurochemistry, marketed as safe medicine. This was millions of people changed at the cellular level by a product that their doctors prescribed and their insurance covered and their government approved. The machine created them, and then the machine abandoned them. But that's the next act. That's the reckoning. That's when everything Tom believed about his place in the system turned out to be wrong. The dead started piling up in places America doesn't usually watch. Small towns in eastern Kentucky, hollowed-out mining communities in West Virginia, rural counties in Ohio where the biggest employer left a decade ago and nothing came to replace it. The coroners in these places started noticing something. Overdose deaths that didn't fit the usual patterns. Young people, middle-aged people, people with jobs and families and no criminal history, people whose medicine cabinets told a story that didn't match the narrative anyone wanted to hear. For years the coverage was a joke, literally a joke. Hillbilly heroin, the newspapers called it. OxyContin abuse framed as an Appalachian peculiarity, something those people did, something that happened over there in the mountains, among populations that coastal media didn't consider fully American. The framing was classist and regional and comfortable. It allowed everyone else to feel safe. Then the children of comfortable people started dying. That's when America noticed. That's when the crisis became a crisis instead of a punchline. When the deaths spread from coal country to suburbs, from Appalachia to Long Island, from the marginalized places to the places that mattered to people who make decisions. The opioid epidemic became real when it became visible to the people who control visibility. Parent advocacy groups formed with the particular fury of loss that cannot be explained. Mothers and fathers who had done everything right, who had raised their children in good neighborhoods with good schools, who had paid for sports and tutors and college, who had watched their children die anyway, from pills that doctors prescribed, from a crisis that no one had warned them about. These parents wanted answers. These parents wanted accountability. These parents had the resources and the connections to demand both. The lawsuits began. First a trickle, then a flood. Cities suing Purdue, counties suing distributors, states suing everyone in the supply chain. The legal theory was simple enough. You knew. You profited. You're responsible. The evidence emerged through discovery, the internal memos, the sales reports, the documented knowledge that had been hidden from the public for years. Each lawsuit revealed more. Each revelation made the next lawsuit easier. Congressional hearings brought executives to Washington, men in expensive suits sitting behind microphones, explaining the inexplainable with the careful non-language of lawyers. We believed the science supported our marketing. We relied on FDA approval. Addiction is a complex disease with many contributing factors. The word sorry appeared occasionally, always with qualifications, always directed at outcomes rather than actions. We're sorry people were harmed. Never. We're sorry for what we did. The turning points came in sequence. In 2007, Purdue pleaded guilty. The $634 million fine made headlines. The lack of prison time did not. The machine had been officially condemned and officially allowed to continue operating. In 2010, Purdue reformulated OxyContin. The new version couldn't be crushed, couldn't be snorted, couldn't be easily converted from a time-release medication into an immediate rush. The company marketed this as responsibility. See, we fixed it. We made the drug abuse resistant. We're part of the solution now. What they didn't fix was the millions of people already dependent on the old formulation. What they didn't address was the biological reality that had been created over the previous 14 years. The new pill was harder to abuse. It was exactly as addictive as the old pill for people taking it as prescribed. And for people who had been abusing the old pill, the new formulation didn't cure their addiction. It just removed their supply. In 2012, Florida finally cracked down. The pill mills that had operated openly for years began facing consequences. Doctors lost licenses. Clinics closed. The I-75 pipeline that had supplied much of the eastern United States began to dry up. Kentucky and Tennessee and Ohio, states that had been hemorrhaging residents to Florida's prescription factories, suddenly found that supply route cut off. In 2014, the DEA tightened regulations on hydrocodone, moving it from Schedule 3 to Schedule 2. This meant more paperwork for doctors, more scrutiny for patients, more friction in the system that had been lubricating the flow of opioids into American bloodstreams. In 2016, the CDC issued guidelines recommending against high-dose opioid prescriptions for chronic pain. The guidelines weren't binding, they weren't law, but they signaled a fundamental shift. The same medical establishment that had pushed pain as the fifth vital sign was now pushing doctors away from the treatments they'd been encouraged to provide. Each of these interventions was defensible in isolation. Each addressed a real problem. The pill mills were real. The overprescription was real. The death toll was real. Something had to be done, but here's what none of these interventions did. None of them addressed the people who were already dependent. None of them provided a bridge from the world that had been created to the world that was being imposed. None of them asked the obvious question: what happens to the millions of Americans whose brains have been reorganized around a substance you're now taking away? The answer, it turned out, was nothing. Nothing happens to them. Nothing official, anyway. They were on their own. The doctors turned first. Not all of them. not the ones who had always been careful, but the doctors who had been prescribing freely, the ones who had been targeted by Purdue's sales force and educated by Purdue's speaker programs, and encouraged by the fifth vital sign framework to treat pain aggressively. Those doctors felt the wind shift. Those doctors started getting nervous. The DEA was investigating prescribers. Medical boards were reviewing licenses. The same doctors who had been told they were undertreating pain were now being told they might be drug dealers. The legal exposure was suddenly terrifying. A doctor who had written thousands of opioid prescriptions over the past decade could look at those records and see not a career of compassionate care but a potential federal indictment. The response was predictable. The response was self-protective. The response left patients stranded. Some doctors retired early. Some closed their practices. Some simply stopped prescribing opioids entirely, converting overnight from generous providers to absolute prohibitionists. The whiplash was stunning. Patients who had been receiving the same prescription for years showed up for their regular appointments and were told no, not reduced doses, not tapering schedules, just no. The Dear Patient letters went out, form letters, often legally vetted language designed to protect the practice while delivering devastating news. Due to changing regulatory requirements and updated medical guidelines, we will no longer be able to prescribe controlled substances for chronic pain management. We recommend you seek care from a specialist. We wish you well. We wish you well. 4 words that meant nothing. 4 words that offered nothing. 4 words followed by a closed door and a body that couldn't function without medication it was no longer going to receive. The patients left behind were not a homogeneous group. Some were addicted in the clinical sense. Compulsive use despite negative consequences. Loss of control. Continued use in the face of clear harm. These patients needed addiction treatment. They didn't receive addiction treatment. They received abandonment. Some were dependent without being addicted. Their bodies required the medication. Their lives didn't revolve around it. They took their pills as prescribed, functioned normally, went to work, raised families. They needed managed care, perhaps eventual tapering, certainly a plan. They didn't receive a plan. They received abandonment. Some were chronic pain patients whose underlying conditions hadn't changed. The herniated disc was still herniated. The fibromyalgia was still fibromyalgia. The failed back surgery had still failed. These patients needed alternative pain management, other treatments, different approaches. They didn't receive alternatives. They received abandonment. The medical system that had created the crisis simply walked away from it. The regulatory system that had enabled the overprescription now enabled the undertreatment. The same institutional failures that had flooded America with opioids now guaranteed that no help would be available when the flood receded. You've been taking this pill for 5 years. You didn't ask for it initially. You got hurt at work, a back injury, and the company doctor prescribed something for the pain. It worked. You recovered enough to return to work, but the prescription continued. Your doctor said it was fine. Your doctor said this was how chronic pain was managed. Now, your doctor gave you monthly refills and you took them as directed and life went on. You've never taken more than prescribed, not once in 5 years. You've never asked for early refills. You've never sought out multiple doctors. You've never done any of the things you've seen on television shows about drug addicts. You're not an addict, you're a patient. You have a prescription bottle with your name on it, and a doctor who gives you that bottle every month. You go to your appointment on a Tuesday. You've been going to this office for 3 years, since your previous doctor retired. The waiting room is familiar. The receptionist knows your name. You sign in and sit down and wait to be called back. But the receptionist is looking at you strangely. She seems uncomfortable. She makes a phone call. Someone comes out from the back. Not your doctor, an administrator. She asks you to come with her. In a small office, she explains, the practice is restructuring. Your doctor is no longer seeing patients for pain management. They're referring all chronic pain patients to specialists. She hands you a list of names. She wishes you well. You have 10 days of medication left in your current bottle. The specialists on the list have waiting times measured in months. Some aren't taking new patients. Some don't accept your insurance. Some are 2 hours away. You make phone calls from your car in the parking lot. You make phone calls that evening. You make phone calls the next day and the day after that. The answers are the same. Not taking new patients. Waiting list is 6 months. We don't prescribe opioids for chronic pain anymore. Have you tried physical therapy? By day 7, you still don't have an appointment. By day 9, you're rationing your remaining pills, cutting them in half, trying to stretch 3 days of medication into 6. It doesn't work. The math doesn't work. You can't cheat biology with arithmetic. On day 10, you take your last half pill. You don't know what's about to happen to your body. You've heard about withdrawal in vague terms. You've never experienced it. You're about to 12 hours after your last dose, the first symptoms begin. They're subtle at first. A slight unease, a vague sense that something is wrong. Your body knows. Your brain knows. The supply has stopped and the systems calibrated around that supply are beginning to react. By hour 18, the subtlety is gone. Your nose is running. Your eyes are watering. You feel like you're getting the flu. You tell yourself it's the flu. You tell yourself it's a coincidence. Your body tells you something else. By hour 24, you understand. This is not the flu. This is the absence. This is what happens when the substance your brain has been building around for 5 years suddenly disappears. You're sweating. Not normal sweat. Sick sweat. Cold sweat. The kind that soaks through sheets and leaves you shivering in a pool of your own moisture. You're hot and cold simultaneously, which shouldn't be possible, but your body has stopped following the rules of possibility. Your legs won't stop moving. They twitch and jerk and spasm without your permission. You try to hold them still and they move anyway. This is restless leg syndrome, the medical term. But the medical term doesn't capture the experience. The experience is being trapped in a body that's trying to run away from itself. Your stomach cramps. Not hunger cramps. Not indigestion. Deep grinding cramps that feel like your intestines are being wrung out by invisible hands. You make it to the bathroom. You barely make it to the bathroom. What comes out is not normal. What comes out over and over and over for hours is your body evacuating everything it contains in a desperate attempt to reset itself. The vomiting starts around hour 30. There's nothing in your stomach, but your body tries to empty it anyway. Dry heaves that hurt your ribs, bile that burns your throat, the feeling that your body has become a machine designed solely for the purpose of suffering. This is day 1. Day 2 is worse. Day 2 is when you realize this isn't going to end quickly. Day 2 is when the psychological component kicks in. The physical symptoms continue. The sweating, the cramping, the restless legs, the bathroom emergencies that leave you exhausted and dehydrated. But now there's something else. Now there's the anxiety. Not normal anxiety. Not the feeling you get before a job interview or a difficult conversation. This anxiety is chemical. This anxiety is your brain screaming in a frequency you've never heard before. This anxiety is the biological certainty that something terrible is happening and will never stop happening. You can't sit still, but you can't move. You can't sleep, but you can't stay awake. You can't think about anything except the one thing that would make this stop, the one solution that exists, the one phone call you could make. You know people. Everyone knows people. Someone at work has a connection. A friend of a friend knows where to find things. The number exists in your phone maybe, or could be found with a few questions. You haven't thought about this before. You're thinking about it now, but you're not that person. You're not someone who buys drugs illegally. You're a patient. You have a prescription bottle with your name on it. The bottle is empty, but it has your name on it. That has to mean something. You make more phone calls. You call doctors you've seen years ago. You call urgent care clinics. You explain your situation. You hear the same things. We can't help you. That's not something we prescribe. Have you tried going to the emergency room? The emergency room, where they'll treat you like an addict, where they'll give you Tylenol and a pamphlet about drug abuse, where you'll spend 8 hours in a waiting room full of people who are also suffering, also desperate, also invisible to a system that created them and discarded them. You don't go to the emergency room. You go back to bed. You sweat through another set of sheets. You watch the clock move impossibly slowly. You wonder how long a person can survive feeling like this. Day 3. Tom is in day 3. It's 2013. He's 52 years old. He's been taking OxyContin since 1997, when his doctor gave him that first prescription after the work injury that changed everything. 16 years. His brain hasn't operated without opioids in 16 years. His doctor retired last month. The new doctor, a young woman fresh from residency, looked at his chart and told him she wasn't comfortable continuing his medication. She gave him a list of pain specialists. She wished him well. Tom has been through 2 days of withdrawal. 2 days that felt like 2 years. 2 days that broke something inside him that he didn't know could be broken. He's lying on the bathroom floor because the bathroom floor is cool and the coolness feels like the only mercy available. He's been crying, which he hasn't done since his mother's funeral. He's been praying, which he hasn't done since he stopped believing in a God who would let people feel like this. The phone is in his hand. The number is on the screen. A guy from work, someone he's known for years, someone who mentioned once that he knew where to find things if things ever got hard to find. Tom knows what this means. Tom knows that if he makes this call, he's crossing a line. He's becoming someone different. He's becoming the person the news talks about, the person the politicians warn about, the person he never thought he could be. But the alternative is this floor. The alternative is day 4 and day 5, and however many more days of this. The alternative is continuing to feel like his body is being dismantled from the inside, while his brain screams for relief that doesn't exist. Through any legitimate channel, Tom makes the call. He doesn't know it yet, but this call is being made all over America, in small towns and suburbs, in cities and rural counties, by people who look like Tom and people who look nothing like him, by veterans and construction workers and teachers and nurses and every other kind of person who trusted a doctor and followed the rules and found themselves abandoned when the rules changed. The line between patient and criminal isn't drawn by character. It isn't drawn by morality. It isn't drawn by anything the person on either side controls. The line is drawn by supply. When the legal supply exists, you're a patient. When it disappears, you're something else. Tom is about to become something else. The reckoning came for the companies and the doctors and the regulators. Fines were paid, practices closed, guidelines changed. The system that created the crisis made adjustments. The reckoning came for the patients too, but their reckoning looked different. Their reckoning looked like a bathroom floor at 3 a.m. Their reckoning looked like a phone call that changed everything. Their reckoning looked like the moment they realized that no one was coming to help them, that they were on their own, that the bridge between what they were and what they were about to become had been burned by the same people who'd pushed them onto it. The machine created them, the machine abandoned them, and now they had a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. Before we go any further, we need to talk about money, because the bridge between prescription pills and heroin wasn't built from desperation alone. It was built from arithmetic. Simple arithmetic that anyone with a habit and an empty wallet could do. OxyContin on the street cost roughly $1 per milligram. This was the going rate across most of America by the early 2010. A single 80 milligram pill, the kind that chronic pain patients might take twice a day, cost $80 on the black market. If you needed that dose to function, if your brain had been calibrated around that dose for years, if taking less meant withdrawal and taking nothing meant agony, you were looking at $160 a day just to feel normal. Let's do the monthly math. $160 times 30 days equals $4,800 per month. To maintain, not to get high, not to party, just to not be sick, just to go to work and pick up your kids and sleep through the night and exist as a functional human being. $4,800 per month. $57,600 per year. For a person who might be making $35,000 annually, for a person who might have lost their job because of their condition, for a person who might be burning through savings and selling possessions and borrowing from family members who are starting to ask questions, the math didn't work. The math couldn't work, and everyone in that situation knew it. Now here's the other number. Heroin cost roughly $10 per dose, a dose that would accomplish the same thing, a dose that would silence the withdrawal and restore normality, and buy another few hours of being able to function. $10 versus $80, 1/8 the price. Same result. The monthly math on heroin, maybe $30 to $60 per day, depending on tolerance. Maybe $900 to $1,800 per month. Still a lot of money. Still an impossible burden for someone whose life is collapsing. But possible. Survivable. A number that could be managed through some combination of work and hustle and the small crimes of desperation. The math was simple. The math was devastating. And the math explained everything that happened next. The dealers understood the math before anyone else did. The heroin dealers, the people who had been serving a relatively small and stable population of users for decades, suddenly noticed a change in their market. New customers were appearing. Customers who didn't look like their usual clientele. Customers who were older, whiter, more suburban. Customers who asked strange questions and didn't know the terminology and seemed terrified of what they were doing. The smart dealers adapted. They didn't just wait for these new customers to find them. They went looking. They positioned themselves near the pill mills. They hung around the pharmacies that had been filling massive prescription orders. They learned to identify the people whose supplies were drying up. The marketing pitch was elegant in its simplicity. It's basically the same thing. This was what the dealers told the pill refugees. Same high, same feeling, way cheaper. You won't even notice the difference. The pitch worked because it was almost true. Heroin and oxycodone are both opioids. They bind to the same receptors. They produce similar effects. The dealers weren't exactly lying. They were just leaving out the parts that mattered. The geographic pattern was unmistakable. Heroin followed the pills. The same regions that had been devastated by OxyContin overprescription became the regions devastated by heroin overdoses. Appalachia, rural Ohio, upstate New York, suburbs of major cities where pill mills had operated or where the I-75 pipeline had delivered. The map of opioid prescriptions in 2005 predicted the map of heroin deaths in 2015. The supply chain reorganized itself to meet the new demand. Mexican cartels saw opportunity. American heroin users had traditionally preferred the white powder heroin that came from Colombia through East Coast distribution networks. But the new users, the pill refugees, didn't have traditional preferences. They didn't know the difference. They just needed something that worked. The cartels increased production. They improved purity. The heroin hitting American streets in the 2010s was stronger than it had been in decades. Not because dealers were generous, because they were smart. Higher purity meant customers who were used to pharmaceutical-grade pills would find the transition easier. Higher purity meant fewer complaints about quality. Higher purity meant, eventually, more overdoses. But that was a problem for later. The numbers tell the story. In 2002, approximately 2,000 Americans died from heroin overdoses. By 2010, that number had risen to about 3,000. By 2016, it was over 13,000. 6 times as many deaths in 14 years. An epidemic inside an epidemic. A crisis created by the solution to the previous crisis. Researchers later determined that roughly 80% of heroin users in the 2010s had started with prescription opioids. Not experimented with prescription opioids. Started with them. Their first opioid experience was a pill from a doctor, not a bag from a dealer. They had been patients before they were addicts. They had been following orders before they were breaking laws. The average time from first prescription to first heroin use was 4 to 7 years. Long enough to build tolerance, long enough to develop dependence, long enough to exhaust legitimate options, long enough for the math to become undeniable. The bridge wasn't built in a day. It was built over years. It was built by a healthcare system that created dependence and then withdrew treatment. It was built by a regulatory system that cracked down on supply without addressing demand. It was built by an economic reality that made the illegal option the only affordable option. The bridge was built, and millions of Americans walked across it, not because they wanted to, because there was nowhere else to go. The word heroin carries weight that the word OxyContin never did. This is important. This is part of how the transition felt. OxyContin was medicine. OxyContin came in bottles with pharmacy labels. OxyContin was prescribed by doctors and covered by insurance and purchased at CVS. OxyContin was respectable. OxyContin was what responsible people with legitimate conditions took to manage their pain. Heroin was something else entirely. Heroin was the drug from after-school specials. Heroin was needles in alleyways. Heroin was junkies nodding off in abandoned buildings. Heroin was the drug that killed rock stars and destroyed families and ruined lives. Heroin was the bottom. Heroin was the end. Every person who crossed the bridge had to overcome this distinction, had to talk themselves across it, had to find some way to reconcile who they believed themselves to be with what they were about to do. The self-negotiation was elaborate. It had to be. Identity doesn't surrender easily. This is temporary. This is just until I find a new doctor. This is just to get through the week. The future tense allowed the present action. If this wasn't permanent, if this was just a bridge to somewhere better, then maybe crossing it didn't change who you were. This isn't really different from what I was doing before. It's the same chemical, basically. It does the same thing. The only difference is the legality, and that's just a technicality. I'm not doing anything different. I'm just doing it differently. The pharmacological rationalization, true enough to be comforting, false enough to be dangerous. I'm not like those people. I'm not a junkie. I'm a patient who can't get medication. There's a difference. There has to be a difference. The identity protection, the desperate clinging to a self-concept that was already dissolving. The pharmacological truth was complicated. Heroin metabolizes to morphine in the body. OxyContin is oxycodone, a different molecule. They're both opioids. They both work on the same receptors, but they're not identical. The high is different. The duration is different. The risk profile is different. The dealers were close enough to the truth to be convincing. They were far enough from the truth to be deadly. You swore you'd never do this. You swore it to yourself 3 weeks ago when the withdrawal started. You swore it to yourself 3 weeks ago when you were shaking on your bathroom floor. You swore it last week when you almost called the number and then threw your phone across the room instead. You swore it every day, and every day the oath meant less, because every day the alternative was this sickness, this misery, this body that had turned against you because someone took away its medicine. It's 2 a.m. now. You haven't slept more than an hour at a time in 11 days. You've lost weight you couldn't afford to lose. You've called in sick to work so many times that you're not sure you still have a job. Your family has stopped calling because they don't know what to say and you don't know what to tell them. You found a number. You didn't look for it. Not really. But when you mentioned to someone that you were having trouble getting your prescription, they mentioned they knew a guy, and now you have a number. You called it. You actually called it, and someone answered, and that someone is willing to drive to you. Tonight, right now, he'll be there in 20 minutes. You wait in your car in a parking lot behind a grocery store. This is actually happening. This is actually your life now. The person you were 3 months ago, the person with a prescription and a doctor and a normal relationship to the medical system, that person would not recognize this moment. That person would be horrified by this moment. The car pulls up. A guy gets out. He's younger than you expected. Normal looking. Could be anyone. He walks over to your window and you hand him $60, which is most of what you have until payday. He hands you a small bag. The bag contains brown powder, not white. You expected white. The powder looks wrong. It smells wrong. The smell is chemical and sour and nothing like the pills you're used to. Everything about this moment is wrong. But you take the bag anyway, because the alternative is more nights like the last 11. Because withdrawal doesn't care about your self-concept. Because your body doesn't care about the line you thought you'd never cross. You go home. You find a surface. You follow the instructions the dealer gave you. Instructions that felt surreal to receive. You ingest the powder. 20 minutes later, you understand. You're not high. That's the thing. You're not experiencing euphoria or pleasure or any of the things you associated with drug abuse. You're just not sick anymore. For the first time in 11 days, your skin isn't crawling. Your legs aren't kicking. Your stomach isn't cramping. Your brain isn't screaming. You feel normal. You feel like yourself. You feel like the person you were before all of this started, before the prescription and the dependence and the abandonment. Just a person in a body that works. And you understand with horrible clarity why people do this, why millions of people have done this, why the bridge was crossed by so many who swore they never would, because withdrawal is worse than your pride, because desperation is stronger than identity, because when the choice is between who you think you are and how you actually feel, the feeling wins eventually. The feeling always wins. You've crossed the line, you're a statistic now. One of the 80% who started with pills. One of the millions who found themselves doing the unthinkable because every thinkable option had been taken away. Tomorrow, you'll have to figure out how to get more. Tomorrow, the math will start. Tomorrow, the real descent begins. But tonight, for the first time in almost 2 weeks, you sleep. The transformation happens faster than you'd think. Not the physical transformation. That happened years ago when the pills rewired your brain. The social transformation. The identity transformation. The shift from patient to criminal. From respectable to reviled. From someone who belongs in the world to someone the world wishes would disappear. The first change is legal. This is the starkest one. Yesterday, you were taking a substance prescribed by a doctor. Today, you're committing a felony. The molecule is similar. The effect is similar. Your brain doesn't know the difference, but the law knows the difference, and the law has consequences. Possession of heroin is a crime everywhere in America. In most states, it's a felony that follows you, a felony that appears on background checks, a felony that closes doors to employment, housing, education, the basic building blocks of a stable life. The person who became dependent by following medical advice is now a criminal for trying to manage that dependence. The social death comes next. Families fragment, marriages collapse, friendships evaporate, not always through rejection, sometimes through exhaustion, sometimes through the simple impossibility of maintaining relationships while managing a heroin habit. You can't show up to family dinners when you're worried about being sick by dessert. You can't maintain intimacy when your primary relationship is with a substance. You can't be present when presence requires sobriety, and sobriety requires agony. The employers figure it out eventually. The absences, the deteriorating performance, the bathroom breaks that last too long. The moment your supply is interrupted and you can't hide the withdrawal, some employers fire you outright. Some let you quit. Some call the police. The job disappears either way. And with the job goes income, insurance, routine, purpose, the structures that kept you tethered to normal life. Housing follows employment. Can't pay rent without a job. Can't get a new apartment with an eviction on your record and a felony conviction, and no income verification. The couch surfing starts. The shelters, the cars, the streets, eventually for some. This is the downward spiral. And here's what's crucial to understand. The spiral isn't caused by heroin. The spiral is caused by everything we do to people who use heroin. The criminalization, the stigmatization, the systematic destruction of every support that might help someone recover. A person using heroin could theoretically maintain stability, could work, and parent and participate in society. The drug itself doesn't prevent functionality any more than the pills did. What prevents functionality is the hiding, the hustling, the constant threat of arrest, the impossibility of seeking help without risking everything. The hiding makes everything worse. You learn to lie. You learn to cover track marks if you've progressed to injection. You learn to time your use so the effects aren't visible. You learn to maintain a performance of normalcy while your actual life becomes increasingly abnormal. The energy this requires is exhausting. The isolation this creates is devastating. The criminal justice system waits for you. Not if, when. Eventually, you'll get caught. Maybe buying, maybe possessing, maybe driving when you shouldn't be, maybe stealing something because the money ran out and the sickness was coming. The system that failed to prevent your addiction is very efficient at punishing it. Jail doesn't have methadone, most jails anyway. You'll withdraw in a cell. You'll suffer on concrete. You'll emerge eventually with a record that makes legitimate life even harder, and a tolerance reset that makes your next use even more dangerous. Here's the obscenity at the heart of this story. The systems we have created make it easier to get heroin than to get help. Methadone works. This is not controversial among addiction medicine specialists. Methadone maintenance therapy reduces heroin use, reduces overdose death, reduces HIV transmission, improves employment, improves stability. The evidence is overwhelming, but methadone is controlled more tightly than heroin is. Methadone requires daily visits to licensed clinics, requires supervision and urine tests and counseling and compliance, requires showing up at 6 a.m. and standing in line with other addicts in a building that advertises your status to anyone watching. The clinics have waiting lists. 6 weeks, 6 months, sometimes longer. 6 months during which heroin is available everywhere, all the time, from dealers who don't ask for identification or insurance cards or proof of medical necessity. Buprenorphine is another option. Suboxone, the brand name, can be prescribed by doctors with special certification, can be taken at home, doesn't require daily clinic visits. But finding a doctor who prescribes it is hard. Finding a doctor who prescribes it and accepts your insurance if you still have insurance is harder. Finding a doctor with an open appointment when you're in crisis is nearly impossible. The insurance companies fight every claim, not medically necessary. Prior authorization required. This treatment duration exceeds recommended guidelines. Every barrier to treatment, every obstacle to recovery, every incentive to just go buy heroin instead. This is the policy failure laid bare. The medical system created the addiction. The legal system criminalized the addicted. Neither system offered a way out. Neither system even tried to build a bridge back. Tom is 37 days into his new life. The first heroin purchase was 3 weeks ago. There have been others since. He's learned the rhythms, the timing, the calculations of when to use and how much, and how to stretch supplies when money is tight. He still thinks of this as temporary. He still tells himself he'll find a doctor, get back on legitimate medication, return to the person he was. The story he tells himself requires this ending. The story can't end here, but the math is getting harder. He's missed too much work. His savings are gone. The people he could borrow from have stopped answering calls. The downward slope is becoming visible. He hasn't told his wife the full truth. She knows something is wrong. She doesn't know what. He's not sure what would happen if she knew. He's afraid to find out. The person Tom was, the construction worker with the bad back and the prescription and the normal life, that person is receding, becoming a memory, becoming someone Tom used to know. The person Tom is becoming doesn't have a name yet. The word addict doesn't feel right. The word junkie feels like an insult, but the categories the world uses don't have space for what actually happened to him, don't have language for the millions who crossed the bridge, not because they wanted to, but because every other path was closed. Tom isn't choosing heroin. Tom is choosing not to be sick. Every single day, every purchase, every use, every risk is a choice to not spend the next 72 hours in agony. When the alternative is withdrawal, there is no choice. There's only survival. The people who became heroin users weren't choosing heroin. They were choosing to not suffer. They were choosing thousands of times to make it through one more day. They were choosing the only option that the systems around them had left available. This is the bridge. This is how it was crossed. This is why millions of Americans who started with prescriptions ended with needles, not because they were weak, not because they lacked character, because the math was impossible, because the systems failed, because when you're drowning and someone throws you a rope, you don't ask where the rope came from. You just hold on. Everything we've talked about tonight has happened before. Every single part of it. The miracle drug, the aggressive marketing, the epidemic of dependence, the crackdown, the transition to something worse, the bodies, all of it. America has been here before. America keeps coming back. Let me show you the pattern. The Civil War begins. Over the next 4 years, approximately 620,000 Americans will die. Millions more will be wounded. The injuries are catastrophic. Mini balls shatter bones. Amputations happen without anesthesia until someone figures out that morphine, administered by the newly invented hypodermic needle, can make the unbearable bearable. Morphine becomes the miracle of the battlefield. Doctors inject it freely. Soldiers survive surgeries they would have died from. The wounded find relief. The Army Medical Corps distributes morphine like ammunition because in a certain sense it is ammunition. It keeps men alive to fight again. The war ends. The soldiers go home. But something goes with them. Hundreds of thousands of veterans return to civilian life carrying a dependence they didn't ask for and don't understand. They need the morphine. Their bodies have been reorganized around its presence. When they don't have it, they get sick. They called it soldier's disease. It was the first mass opioid epidemic in American history, the first time the pattern revealed itself. A substance that helped, distributed beyond appropriate limits. Dependence following like a shadow, and no one to blame except the systems that created the problem. The solution to the morphine epidemic seemed obvious. Find something less addictive. Find something that could treat the dependence without creating more of it. In 1898, a German pharmaceutical company introduced a new product. They called it heroin, from the German word heroisch, meaning heroic, because of how it made patients feel. The company was Bayer, yes, the aspirin people. They marketed heroin as a safe alternative to morphine, non-addictive, a cure for morphine dependence. They believed this. The early studies seemed to support it. The advertisements from this era are astonishing to read now. Heroin, the sedative, for coughs. Heroin for the treatment of morphinism. Medical journals published articles praising the new wonder drug. Doctors prescribed it freely. Mothers gave it to children for coughs. This wasn't cynical deception, they actually believed it. By 1910, the belief had collapsed. Heroin was more addictive than morphine, not less. The withdrawal was worse. The dependence formed faster. The cure had become a new disease. The solution had needed its own solution. The United States banned heroin in 1924. The Harrison Narcotics Act of 1914 had already begun criminalizing opioids. The era of legal medical heroin was over. The era of illegal criminal heroin was beginning. The people who had become dependent didn't disappear. They just became criminals. Do you see the pattern? Miracle drug, overprescription, epidemic, crackdown, criminalization. The people trapped in the middle punished for a problem they didn't create. The pattern repeated in the 1960s and 70s with methadone. Here was a new solution, a long-acting opioid that could treat heroin dependence. Patients wouldn't need to inject. They wouldn't need to hustle. They could stabilize and function and rejoin society. Methadone was the answer. Except methadone was also addictive. Methadone created its own dependence. Methadone clinics became contested spaces, both essential services and visible reminders of addiction's persistence. Methadone helped millions. Methadone also became another thing to be dependent on. Then came the 1990s. Then came OxyContin. And the language was exactly the same. Safe, non-addictive, different from what came before. The time-release formula prevents abuse. The data shows minimal addiction risk. We've learned from the past. We've solved the problem. This time is different. The advertisements from the OxyContin era echo the heroin advertisements from a century earlier. The medical journal articles praising the new approach echo the articles from 1898. The confidence, the certainty, the absolute conviction that the new substance has solved what the old substance created. Each generation believes it's different. Each generation trusts the science of its moment. Each generation looks at the failures of the past and says, "We're smarter now. We know better." That couldn't happen today. And each generation creates the same catastrophe wearing new clothes. The manufacturer's playbook hasn't changed in 100 years. The steps are the same, only the names are different. Step 1. Promise safety based on thin evidence. Find a study, any study. A study that supports your claim, even if it's a single paragraph in an obscure journal, even if it's based on a handful of patients, even if it says something much more limited than what you'll claim it says. Wave that study like a flag. Make it the foundation of your marketing. Hope no one reads it carefully. Step 2. Market aggressively. Target vulnerable populations. Find the doctors who already want to prescribe. Find the patients who are already in pain. Find the communities that are already desperate. Don't waste resources on skeptics. Focus on believers. Convert them to evangelists. Let them do your work for you. Step 3. Deny problems as they emerge. When the first reports of abuse come in, dismiss them. Isolated incidents. Aberrant behavior, not the product's fault. When the reports multiply, commission studies that reach reassuring conclusions. When the deaths start accumulating, question the data. Attack the messengers. Buy time. Step 4. settle lawsuits as a cost of doing business. When the legal reckoning comes, and it always comes eventually, negotiate, pay fines that sound large but are small compared to profits, admit no wrongdoing, plead to charges that don't require prison, calculate the cost of destroying lives and write it off as overhead. Step 5. Repeat with the next substance, because there's always a next substance, because pain still exists, because the demand never disappears, because someone will always be willing to meet that demand with a new promise of safety. Bayer made this calculation with heroin. Purdue made this calculation with OxyContin. Someone is making this calculation right now with something we haven't heard of yet. The pattern doesn't require villains. The pattern just requires systems that reward the wrong things. The heroin supply was never stable. This is something the people crossing the bridge didn't fully understand. Heroin varies in purity. Heroin comes from different sources. Heroin gets cut with different substances. Every purchase is a gamble. Every dose is a guess. But for a while, the gamble was manageable. For a while, users could learn their dealer's product, adjust their doses, develop routines that kept them alive. The heroin era was dangerous but survivable. People could use for years, decades even, without dying. The risk was real but calculable. Then came fentanyl. Fentanyl is a synthetic opioid. It was developed for surgical anesthesia for cancer pain, for the most extreme cases where other opioids weren't strong enough. Fentanyl is approximately 50 times more potent than heroin. The dose that creates euphoria and the dose that stops breathing are terrifyingly close together. In the early 2010s, clandestine laboratories, mostly in China, began producing fentanyl for the illicit market. The economics were irresistible. Fentanyl is cheap to manufacture. A kilogram of fentanyl, which can be synthesized for a few $1,000s, can generate millions in street sales. The profit margins dwarf heroin. Mexican cartels recognized the opportunity. Why smuggle bulky heroin shipments when a small package of fentanyl could accomplish the same thing? Why maintain poppy fields and processing facilities when a laboratory could produce unlimited supply? The cartels began cutting heroin with fentanyl. Then they began replacing heroin with fentanyl entirely. The users didn't know. They couldn't know. The powder looked the same. The transactions felt the same. The rituals remained unchanged. But the substance had transformed into something far more deadly. The death toll exploded. In 2015, approximately 33,000 Americans died from opioid overdoses. By 2017, the number exceeded 47,000. By 2020, it surpassed 70,000. By 2022, it approached 80,000. Each year worse than the last. Each year the same pattern accelerating toward more bodies. The people dying weren't new users seeking thrills. Many of them were veteran users who had survived years of heroin, who had learned their tolerances, who had developed the careful practices that experienced users develop. They died because the rules changed without warning. They died because a dose that had been safe yesterday was lethal today. They died because fentanyl doesn't forgive mistakes. Here's the grim irony. Follow the pipeline. A person receives a prescription for OxyContin. They take it as directed. They develop dependence because that's what opioids do. Their prescription gets cut off because the regulations changed. They experience withdrawal because their body requires opioids to function. They turn to heroin because it's cheaper than black market pills. They survive the transition because heroin is dangerous but survivable. Then fentanyl enters their supply and they die. They did everything the system told them to do. They followed doctors' orders. They adapted when the rules changed. They survived each transition, and they died anyway because the final transition was unsurvivable. The pipeline runs one direction: prescription to heroin to fentanyl. Each stage more dangerous than the last. Each transition driven not by user choices but by supply changes. The pills got harder to obtain. The heroin got contaminated with something stronger. The users didn't choose any of this. They just kept trying to survive. 100,000 Americans now die from drug overdoses every year. The majority involve opioids. The majority of those involve fentanyl. This is the largest drug epidemic in American history. This is more Americans dying annually than died in the entire Vietnam War. This is a September 11th. Every 10 days, every week, forever. Fentanyl has spread beyond the opioid supply. It appears in cocaine. It appears in methamphetamine. It appears in counterfeit pills pressed to look like Xanax or Adderall or Percocet. People who have never touched opioids are dying from fentanyl because they bought something that wasn't what they thought it was. The harm reduction community has responded as best it can. Test strips that can detect fentanyl in drug supplies. Naloxone distributed on street corners. The overdose reversal medication that can bring people back from the edge of death if administered in time. Safe injection sites in a few cities. Places where people can use under supervision with medical help standing by. These measures save lives. The evidence is clear, but they are band-aids on a hemorrhage. They don't address the supply. They don't address the dependence. They don't address the systems that keep generating the crisis. The pattern continues. The bodies accumulate, and somewhere, someone is working on the next solution that will become the next problem. Why does this keep happening? Why does America keep running the same cycle with different substances? Why can't we learn? The answer isn't drugs. The answer is systems. Start with healthcare. America has a pain problem. Millions of people with chronic pain. Millions of people whose conditions cause genuine suffering. And a healthcare system that has never figured out how to treat them adequately. The system oscillates between extremes. Deny pain treatment and people suffer needlessly. Provide opioids freely and people become dependent. Neither extreme works. The middle ground requires resources, attention, individualized care. The middle ground is expensive and complicated. The system doesn't do expensive and complicated well. Continue to regulation. The FDA, the DEA, the agencies that are supposed to protect us. They are captured institutions. Pharmaceutical companies fund them. Pharmaceutical executives staff them. The revolving door spins continuously between regulator and regulated. Curtis Wright approved OxyContin for the FDA, then went to work for Purdue. Scott Gottlieb fought Kratom at the FDA, then joined Pfizer's board. The pattern is structural, the corruption is legal, the system protects the system. Add the legal system. When addiction happens, when the healthcare system creates dependence and the regulatory system fails to prevent it, the legal system steps in, not to help, to punish. Addiction is treated as crime. Dependence is treated as moral failure. People who are sick are locked in cages. People who need treatment are given sentences. The prison system profits from addiction. The for-profit bail system profits from addiction. An entire economy has been built on criminalizing the dependent. Don't forget politics. Nuanced drug policy doesn't win elections. Tough on crime wins elections. Lock them up wins elections. Politicians who suggest treating addiction as healthcare rather than crime get called soft. Politicians who question prohibition get called naive. The political incentives all point toward punishment, towards spectacle, towards solutions that don't solve anything but look good on television. And underneath everything, economics. There is money in addiction. Pharmaceutical companies made billions from OxyContin. Private prisons make billions from incarceration. Drug cartels make billions from illegal supply. Treatment centers make billions from desperate families. The economic incentives are aligned toward perpetuating the problem, not solving it. The pattern isn't about drugs. The pattern is about systems that profit from sickness and punishment. The pattern is about institutions that fail by design. The pattern is about a country that has never decided whether drug users are patients or criminals, and has therefore decided they are both with all the cruelty that contradiction implies. The accountability gap remains obscene. Purdue Pharma declared bankruptcy in 2021. The company that created the crisis was dissolved. The settlements totaled billions. This sounds like justice until you look at where the money went. The Sackler family, the owners of Purdue, the people who made the decisions and collected the profits, kept most of their wealth. They withdrew billions from the company before the bankruptcy. They negotiated immunity from future lawsuits. They maintained their mansions and their art collections and their philanthropic naming opportunities. The Sackler name still adorns museums and universities. The Sackler fortune still funds charitable foundations. The executives who orchestrated the epidemic faced no prison time, not the 3 who pleaded guilty in 2007, not anyone since. The worst punishment any Purdue executive received was probation and community service. They paid fines that were smaller than their bonuses. Compare this to street-level dealers. Young men, often black or brown, often from poor communities, selling small quantities to survive. They face decades in federal prison. They face mandatory minimums. They face sentences that destroy their lives and their families' lives for conduct that is, in terms of actual harm caused, infinitely less damaging than what Purdue did. The message is clear. If you're going to profit from addiction, do it from a boardroom. Do it with lawyers and lobbyists and a pharmaceutical license. The system punishes the small dealer and protects the large one. The system criminalizes the desperate and immunizes the powerful. Tom is not here to tell you how his story ends. Tom is a composite, a representative figure, an amalgamation of millions of stories into one narrative thread. But Tom is also 400,000 Americans who died from opioid overdoses between 1999 and 2023. Tom is the largest drug epidemic in American history. Tom is a policy failure with a body count. Tom trusted his doctor. Tom followed the rules. Tom did everything he was supposed to do, and he ended up buying heroin in a parking lot. Not because he was weak, not because he lacked character, because every system that was supposed to help him failed, because the medical system created his dependence, and the regulatory system enabled it, and the legal system criminalized it, and the political system ignored it, and the economic system profited from it. Tom is what happens when systems break. Tom is what happens when no one takes responsibility. Tom is what keeps happening because we refuse to learn. If there's a lesson in this story, and I'm not sure there is, it's this. The line between patient and addict is drawn not by character but by circumstance. The construction worker with the bad back and the teenager at the party are separated by nothing more than the context of their first opioid experience. One gets a prescription, one gets a felony. Same substance, same brain chemistry, different categories, different fates. The same molecule can be medicine or poison depending on who sells it and who writes the rules. OxyContin in a pharmacy is healthcare. Heroin on a corner is a crime. The molecule doesn't know the difference. Only the law knows the difference. And the law has always cared more about who profits than who suffers. America has a pattern. The pattern doesn't end when we ban one substance or punish one company. The pattern ends when we fix the systems that keep generating it. When we treat pain adequately so people don't need to self-medicate. When we regulate industries so they can't profit from creating dependence. When we treat addiction as healthcare so the dependent can recover instead of rot in prison. When we align political and economic incentives towards solutions instead of perpetuation. We haven't done that. We're not even close. The systems remain broken. The incentives remain perverse. The pattern continues. And somewhere tonight in a doctor's office in a suburb or a rural town or a city neighborhood, someone is picking up their first prescription, an opioid for a legitimate injury, a medication that will help with real pain. The doctor says it's safe. The patient believes him. Why wouldn't they believe him? The next chapter is already being written. We just don't know the ending yet.